Hello everyone, welcome to Lavender Live. This week we're chatting all about follow-ups. We'll jump straight into it. Got an awesome guest on today. We've got Armand from 30 Minutes to President's Club. If you don't listen to that podcast, you 100% should. It was one of the first podcasts I stumbled across while working in B2B sales. They have the best guests, some of the most actionable tips, and they really cut the fluff. Welcome, Armand. How are you doing today, my friend?
What's going on, folks? I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing this morning, afternoon, wherever the heck you are, Will? How are you?
I am fabulous, mate. Just got back from a walk with the dog, hence the sunglasses, and I thought I'm going to leave these puppies on because I feel like we're going to have a party today with this topic.
You know, we might join you in the sunglass part. They're in my car. Otherwise, actually, give me one hot second.
Get those studies on. They got to compete with this. They better be 30 Minutes to President's Club branded. Okay, going for the orange.
These are pretty on brand. Come on, I bet you were expecting some lame black Ray-Bans or something like that. You think I'm messing around with some fancy? No, this is how we do it.
I'd love to see it, mate.
That's right.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Just quickly before we jump in, everyone, these sessions are recorded. They go up on our YouTube channel. They even get repurposed as a podcast on all your favorite podcasting platforms as well. So if you want to listen on Spotify, you can always go back and listen to these episodes. It's called Lavender Later over there, which is meant to be a play on words. But anyway, today we're talking about following up with leads, basically doing it the right way instead of the wrong way. Armand, I hear that you're like the best person to be asking about this. And what we like to do with our guests is not beat around the bush. We want to start with the most important thing that people need to know. So,
who lied to you? Who misled you today, Will?
It was Nick.
It was Nick. Yeah, that's what he does.
But anyway, if there was just one thing you could say today, and then let's say the podcast got cut off, what would it be as it pertains to following up with cold leads?
2 S's: speed and segue. Get to your first time to first touch is the number one thing that you should optimize. Number 2 thing that people tend to screw up is a lot of people are like, yeah, let me get to this lead fast. Sometimes they'll even automate their outreach to this lead, but the segue is the thing that dropped. Let's say, for example, you attended a 30 MPC webinar. The number one thing that people will say is, hey, you have a 30 MPC webinar attendance. Great. Do you want to buy Lavender? And that is a totally over here kind of thing. You got to put the pieces together where you say, hey, you attended a 30 MPC cold email webinar. Typically what that means is you probably spend a lot of time writing emails, the same emails, shortening emails, yada, yada, right? Lavender helps with that. So the segue sentence is the key thing that is missed in dropping golden leads. And these are the worst types of leads to be dropping as opposed to outbound leads.
I love that. And the segue is something that I probably say is missing from most sales outreach, especially when people try to personalize an email.
Correct.
Hey, Armand, I saw you went to University of
Southern California,
SoCal. Want to buy Lavender? That doesn't connect, right? Whereas
That's
when
right.
you can point out a challenge or an observation or a trigger, in your case, your lead follow-up example, and then connect it with that. Why do you think people miss that so often?
I think it's a couple different things. The first is the expectation for speed and volume in the world of sales is sky high. Teams were getting saturated, so you just had to blitz and blitz and blitz and blitz. And that pressure to go fast and get as much activity out as possible forces you to send the quickest, lowest brain form of messaging humanly possible. That's the first reason. The second reason is I believe that the bar for outreach has just been set so freaking low. And I don't blame sales reps because a lot of sales reps will be like, hey, I tailored the email. That's better than 90% of the people out there. I found that Armand went to USC instead of just pitching my single source of truth all-in-one solution, which is frankly 80% of the emails I get. So I get 80% all of these single source of truth, blah, 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 feature irrelevant fake tailoring emails. I get maybe 15% people who tailor and then they just switch. I call it the clickbait tailoring, right?
Yeah.
And then the 5% are the people that spend the extra 10 seconds to just tailor their problem statement to what I do. But to your point, it's the speed, the volume expectations, and just the bar has been set low. That honestly, at least noticing that I'm from SC is better than not doing anything whatsoever.
Totally agree. It's something, but it doesn't really add up. I would argue maybe, and I've seen this in the comment section sometimes, they can come across a little bit disingenuous. Like, hey, look, I saw you went to university. You know, in those cases, sometimes it might actually just be better to get to the point. If the rest of the email is good, you might lose them with that miscellaneous fact. So while we're talking about lead follow-up, you said speed. And you gave an example of like, hey, we attended the 30 minutes to President's Club webinar. What do you mean by speed? Like, is it like a minute after the webinar's finished? How should people be thinking about following up with different types of leads?
Right. So it depends on the role you're in and how the org is structured. But let's say, for example, you're an SDR, right? Or you're an inbound SDR even. At Carta, I was running a team of, I think, 30 or so SDRs, 5 or so of which were inbound SDRs. Right. And for the inbound SDR team, we would pass them these leads. And the goal was to get to a time to first touch under 5 minutes. Time to first touch under 5 minutes. What that typically means is first email, bam, cold call, right? That works for an inbound SDR function. That also works for outbound SDR because you're spending most of your day prospecting, right? The problem is, what if you're a full cycle account executive and for one reason or another, maybe it's a lead popped up in your territory and an SDR is not assigned to it, and you get a lead midday. The main thing that I recommend doing is batch a couple points throughout the day such that you can clear out any open leads that come your way. So for me as an account executive, first thing I would do is I would pop open my inbox. I would prioritize any customer-facing comms and any leads, first dials in the morning. Second, right before lunch, right around 11:30. That was my second block. Third is my end of day sprint ending right around 2:33. So if you have those 3 time blocks, you can batch your inbox, batch your leads, batch your Slack, ignore your annoying manager because you're only focusing on customer facing activities before 2 p.m. As you all know, those are the golden hours, and focus on batching those 3 times a day if you are a full cycle AE.
I don't think I've ever met a successful sales rep who doesn't time block in the way that you've just described. So that's absolute gold. I want to put forward a couple of hypothetical scenarios here of like different types of leads and how you might think about following up with them.
Let's do it.
A lot of the time as sales, we make these jokes about marketing and they're rubbish leads that aren't real leads. Let's say someone's downloaded an asset. They've gone for that classic demand gen. They filled out a form to download. Let's, in this example, say a white paper. Would you change your follow-up based on what they downloaded? How would you go about, following up with that lead if you would even deem them a lead?
All right. So I'm going to give you a couple of different boxing combinations that we can use in the audience. So for everyone in the audience, there are 2 ends of the spectrum. One end of the spectrum is number 1. Okay. Put a number 1 in the chat wait, hold on. Don't do it yet. Number 1 in the chat if most of the leads you get are hard hand raisers. That means like demo requests. I'm interested in your product. Number 2 in the chat if most of the leads that you get are like pseudo warm leads, like I downloaded an ebook or I attended a webinar, what have you. If you're a 1, if that means you have a lot of hand raisers. If that's a 2, that means you get warm leads. Put those in the chat. Okay. Let's start with number 2 because that's the harder one. Number 2 is the harder one. So for number 2, you want to jab, and then hook. Right. And the reason for that is a lot of times you haven't built up enough goodwill with this prospect to be able to even ask or suggest that they might have a problem. So let's say we got a lot of 2s in the chat. Let's say that someone came in, Will, and someone is attending a cold calling webinar.
Right.
And I'm trying to sell Lavender to them, right? Lavender is adjacent to that in the world of prospecting. So the first thing that I might do is I might say, hey, I noticed you attended the 30 NPC webinar, right? If you liked that, usually you're focusing on other types of channel prospecting. Here's an email resource and a social selling resource that you might find relevant because you like that. I'll circle back in a couple weeks to see if you had any other questions, but I thought this might be helpful. No ask, email. Now what I've done is I've done what's called a deposit, right? Then after that, I can come back and I can say, hey, especially if I'm tracking opens, I can say like, hey, you might have taken a look at this. I know you totally might not have had this intention, but usually if you're in the world of prospecting, if you liked what you saw in the last email, oftentimes that means you're spending a lot of time focusing on cold emails, yada, 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 right? Lavender helps with that. So I'm going to use a jab deposit email to set up my right hook, right? So don't ask on that first email. That's one strategy, okay? The other strategy is if it is topically relevant, like it was a cold email webinar, I can just jab in the first paragraph, like we discussed before, and say that, and I can segue to the problem, and then I can segue to the solution, but only if the problem is relevant to the thing that they attended.
Right.
And then for the right hooks, for the hand raisers, you're just going to right hook those ones hard and fast, right? You requested a demo and you're going to get times on their calendar as quickly as humanly possible, but I'll pause there because there are some tactics around that too.
Yeah, I am curious to hear those tactics, but I love the jab concept. Based on the context of the lead, they still need to be closer to contextually the problems that you help solve, right? So taking outside sales, because I hate giving Lavender examples too much. People are like, well, I sell to CFOs. Same idea. If they download like a compensation guide and you're a HR software, that's a good reason to maybe reach out. But if you're maybe an employee engagement, then you might need to do another jab to then move it into engagement rather than pay equity, for example. Great examples. Okay, so inbound demos, strategies there, because sometimes people request a demo and then you get nothing but crickets and they ghost you. You're like, you asked for this. Why are you not replying to me?
100%. So someone requests a demo. Hot take.
Okay.
I had a couple of SDRs who were playing around with this and they were having a lot of success with it, right? Messaging is key. One thing you might consider doing is you may consider doing what I do when I get a yes on a cold call, but I don't get a time on the books. Okay. Yes on a cold call, don't get a time on the books. What's the thing that you do when you get a yes on a cold call? I'll take a meeting with you, but I don't have my calendar in front of you. Anyone know in the chat? Give you 3, 2, 1.
Well, the chat's a little bit delayed, so we might not see the answers
A little bit delayed. That's okay. What you do is you send a placeholder. Okay. This person said, I want to request a demo. They literally have said, I am interested in your product. What you may consider doing is if it's a Monday, you might send a hold TBD in big brackets, Lavender plus customer name on Thursday afternoon. And bingo, Evan got it. And in the invite itself, I'll say, Will, thanks for requesting a demo. I know this time might not work. Here are some others that I'll send over email as well. Looking forward to following up or finalizing a time together. And then immediately at the same time, send an email saying, hey, I sent you a hold just so we don't have to play too much calendar tag. Accept it if that one works. If not, are these some other times that work? Great. So that's what I would do. And I've seen a lot of SDRs have success with it. But if you screw up the phrasing or if you just send the cold calendar invite, you're going to piss some people off.
Yeah. I think that's what I'm hearing in my mind because I love that approach. Sending the call. If someone's showing interest and they've agreed to meet with you, don't play email tennis. Don't chase them because they're probably busy. And if you send them a link, they might not click on it. I like to get an invite out there, put a reschedule link, offer some alternative times in the body. Oftentimes, that busy people actually appreciate that more because they don't have to reply to a bunch of emails.
I appreciate it when people do it.
Me too. Like, for example, when I go on a webinar, sometimes people want to do a planning call. I'm like, just throw an invite. If it doesn't work, I'll propose another time. You know, a lot of the time that works better. However, I think there's two reasons people were worried about that. They're worried that that's like in the realm of cold calendar invite, which is a totally thing that I wouldn't recommend.
Totally.
But the second thing is oftentimes SDRs booking meetings for account executives. When it's not your own calendar, you can sometimes get, annoy people internally booking these meetings that just get rescheduled or won't show, essentially. But definitely, if you're managing your own calendar, 100% get that calendar invite out there because once it's out there, it's so much easier to make that meeting happen.
100%. And this was a common problem that I had both at Carta and Pave where a lot of teams, they orient their scheduling, they frankly organize the entire culture of their sales org around these freaking whiny account executives. I'm sorry. I was an AE, right? And I get it, right? I know you're busy and all that stuff. I know you don't want to get docked in the round robin if it's not a real meeting. I know you want a time block, even though you're just like sending BS emails and managing your pipe at 10 a.m. Pacific time, right? But I prefer to orient my organization around the customer experience and get AEs to set up boundaries by time blocking their own calendars so that anything that is open is fair game. And so we even had a separate queue for placeholder meetings in our round robin queue that were to be confirmed because the number one thing you have to optimize for is customers saying yes. And that is the lowest friction way to get to a customer yes. Don't let your internal garbage bureaucracy processes prevent you from booking a meeting.
Absolute fire. I love that. Spicy takes, but true for a lot of organizations that are just trying to play these, keep these executives happy as anything. Let's switch gears a little bit because we talked about like a few ways that you can deal with like following up with an inbound lead. Now, I don't want to get into like the whole idea of sequencing, because I just did a YouTube video on that. Please go to Lavender YouTube, watch it to the end because retention helps. But if you're following up on like a cold email, that type of thing, I see these cliches where people like thoughts, bumping this top of your inbox, bubbling us up, circling back, touching base. Did you have a chance to read my last email? I have my own thoughts about those types of emails. What do you think about those?
So we'll keep outbound aside for a second.
Okay, all right.
Because I think we can get into a really long debate around outbound, and there are times where I believe those things are effective. I don't like checking back, circling in, I don't like filler words. I have used the thoughts email quite a bit, and it does well, but that's also becoming overused. What I prefer is you have the edge in the outbound and inbound. Sorry, you have the edge in the reply rates with inbound, right? You have an edge over outbound. And a lot of people, to our point earlier around the segue, people like throw that in the trash, and they throw their advantage in the trash on the first touch and on the second touch. So instead of saying thoughts, right, on your second touch, thoughts is oftentimes a reply to an outbound email to say, hey, do you have thoughts on that problem that I suggested that I don't know if you have? With inbound, they've demonstrated some sort of interest, and you can actually flip that with some goodwill, right? And so the way I would flip that is I would say goodwill, no intention. I would say, Will, hey, I sent you some resources because you attended a webinar, you requested a demo on our last a week ago or something like that. I want to make sure I don't drop the ball here. Did I mess something up? Or is this something that isn't a priority right now? Essentially what I want to do is I want to push away a little bit, and I want to put it on me and say, hey, I know you reached out with this thing, right? I want to make sure that I don't drop the ball here because it sounds like you had some interest in us. And I'm going to flip it on them instead of being like, hey, thoughts on my problem? Please answer. Tell me you're not interested. That's how I would flip the script on inbound.
So rather than, for lack of a better word, trying to guilt trip them into because they haven't responded, it's taking accountability and saying, did I mess up? Have I missed the mark here?
Exactly. I wanted to make sure that my favorite line to put in an email is like, hey, on an opportunity, it's actually very similar to a closed loss opportunity that's going ghost on you, is like, hey, Will, I wanted to make sure that I didn't drop the ball here, right? Did you still want to check this thing out? If not, totally fine. Just let me know. And usually that will get you some sort of response instead of saying, hey, are you still interested in this? Hey, thoughts, right? Yeah. That's a good way for an opportunity to not respond to you. You need to evoke the no, and usually you'll get some yeses along the way.
I love that. So we've got a couple of different suggestions you got so far. The depositing idea is a great follow-up because you're building some goodwill for the for them to reciprocate, essentially. Mm-hmm. The ownership of the follow-up, both in lead follow-up, I guess, and a lot of these do apply to deal cycle follow-ups as well when you're not hearing back, when you've not got the next step on the calendar, when you've sent off a proposal. Are there any other ways that you think about switching up the follow-up if those first two methods don't work?
So we've got the deposit method,
and we're not limited to emails here. We are the email people, but we can always mix in some other channels if that's part of your approach as well.
Yeah. So one thing you may consider doing is I can go on a lot of really long rants around how I think social selling is not real selling. Okay. However, connecting with people and DMing people on LinkedIn is selling. Posting on LinkedIn and thinking that you're going to get 20 demo requests because you put a cold email tactic out there is not real selling. So one thing you may consider doing is I always moved my two different leads into two different buckets. So I had my A's and my B's, right? My A's were my prime ICP accounts with the right personas. Maybe it's a VP of sales at a 500 plus employee company, for example. For those ones, you may choose to add a grease the wheel step. And a grease the wheel step might sound like just a LinkedIn connection or with a very light message saying like, hey, saw you reached out with Lavender. I'm going to make sure that we get you taken care of, right? It's messaging with I'm going to help you, right? And then what I would do is I would have that first email go out. I would have the follow-up go out, and then I would have the LinkedIn follow-up go. So I want to use email because email tends to be the thing that scales the best, right? As my first cut, right? That's my preference. I use email as my first big cut for all my leads. Second follow-up, third, LinkedIn DM, fourth, cold call. So if I haven't cracked them with the first email, the second follow-up, and the third LinkedIn DM, usually at that point, I like to make a cold call. Again, this is different if you're an SDR, because if you're an SDR, like you just have all this time in the world to call all these leads. Like you get a lead, send them that email, make a cold call, right? But I find that those first 2 emails in the LinkedIn connection will clear at least 50% of the pack. And then you can spend your time strategically cold calling the remaining parts of your funnel that have not drained all the way to the bottom.
Incredible tips. Is that the point where you might actually start giving up, or is the? I suppose that's the question. We never want to give up in sales. At what point do you call it quits and start to say, okay, I'm not getting any, diminishing return is starting to kick in here, and I should probably leave this person alone for now.
All right, so there's a board game that y'all probably played when you were kids called Guess Who, right? And so the first question that you might ask is, does this person have brown hair or black hair? And that's going to cut out a third of the room, right? But you don't ask your first question, is it the freckled guy, right? Because that's only going to knock down one of the faces on Guess Who. You want to knock out half of the board, then a third of the board, then a quarter of the board, then an eighth of the board, and then you want to start to pinpoint, right? So email is going to knock out half the board. LinkedIn's going to knock off a quarter of the board. Maybe I got a quarter left, right? Cold calling might get me an eighth of the board. And then I've got the finish, right? And the way that I would describe it is if the finish is not worth the squeeze at that point, there's probably some automated semi persona-based tailored messaging that's going to go out over 3-4 touches with your standard, hey, I'm going to start to raise a problem once, right? So first I lead with your inbound touch, follow up once or twice. Second, I raise a problem if that inbound touch is no longer relevant. Third, I'm going through 1 or 2 breakup drips, right? That's for my lower priority folks. If I feel like that last 25% of the funnel is worth squeezing for my A tier accounts, the last couple of last-ish efforts you may consider is number 1, I loved it when my reps would be like, Armand, this person isn't responding. They attended a webinar. They're opening my emails. Will you send them an email as our VP of sales? So change the voice or bring in a senior account executive. Just having someone who can jump in on the thread and say, hey, I'm here to help as well, or we want to make sure that we didn't drop the ball with you. So change the voice once or twice as one more way to shake the bottom of your funnel. And then eventually at a certain point, what you do is you let it rest for a second. And then 30 days later, again, for those good ones, take a deposit email and lead, instead of with another ask in 30 days, then lead with another deposit email. And start this over instead of starting with cold outreach, hitting them over the head one more time.
Absolutely phenomenal advice there. You mentioned a couple of things I wanted to touch on. That again, I'm seeing a lot of parallels between here, what you might do in a deal cycle here. I think it was actually from your podcast where we learned the VP of sales email at the final hour when you're trying to get a deal signed or when someone's ghosting you. You're bringing your VP, your CEO to send an email, which often gets them to reply or pushes them across the line in time. Great email to use in deal cycles. Haven't heard it used in more kind of top of funnel approaches before. You mentioned breakup there. And I think a lot of people get the wrong idea when it comes to like the word breakup in the context of sales and outreach. When you say that, can you elaborate a little bit more? Are you talking about breakup emails? Or you like, how would that be worded in a way that's not, I'm going to use a Gen Z phrase here, chuggy?
Yeah. Chuggy. I like that. Nick's girlfriend used chuggy the other day for the first time, and I was like, what is that? I definitely Googled it on Urban Dictionary. So I'm a 50-year-old in a 30-year-old's body. So anywho, how to avoid the chuggy breakup email. What is a chuggy breakup email? You have things like, hey, are you A, stuck under a rock, B, getting eaten by an alligator, C, interested but really busy, right? All of those garbage, cheesy ones, the cheap tricks, in my experience, don't work with at and above the line buyers, or if they do, they get a lot of the low hanging fruit that would have responded anyway, and then you get a lot of no's. Again, those things work. What I prefer to do is my style of selling is disarmingly blunt and disarmingly honest. I want to be disarmingly blunt and tell people, hey, I don't want to continue reaching out to you, right? You have the ability to get me to stop reaching out to you. Just tell me that you don't want to be reached out to. But by omission and by attending a webinar or requesting a demo, I'm going to assume that you are interested until told otherwise. Now, I'm not going to put that in an email, but the way that my version of the breakup sound is as follows. Again, I'm going to use that same language we used earlier. My first sentence is going to be like, hey, well, for now, I'm going to put this on pause, but I really want to make sure that I don't drop the ball because we value anyone who attends a Lavender event. Here are 3 things that I'm going to leave behind for you, right? A, B, and C that I think are relevant to the 30 MPC webinar, this event, that event that you attended, right? The last sentence is the kicker. I'm going to circle back in about a month's time to see if this comes back up. Do you think I should do that? Or do you think it's worth me circling back? Or is this one of those things that was really just you wanted to see a webinar, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell them, hey, I'm going to reach back out in 30 days. Again, I'm coming back. Should I not do that? You have the ability to put me away now forever.
All you have to do to get rid of me is hit that reply button. And
Correct.
Yeah. I think people do worry that if they reply and tell you no, that you're going to try and talk them out of it. I think that's a big unrecognized reason why people don't feel comfortable telling sellers no. Sometimes it's guilt, sometimes it's saying cow, sometimes they're just busy. But I do feel like people are afraid to say no because they don't want to experience the salesperson trying to change their mind.
Yeah.
So by saying that up front, you kind of address that concern, right?
I know we're short on time, but just to unpack that one a little bit more, let's say I get a response and it's an objection, right? Not interested is not an objection. I can't really work with that. But let's say someone says like, hey folks, like I'm using X solution, right? The number one thing that people make the mistake of is you first need to absorb objections before you handle them. You need to make the prospect feel like you've heard them. And handling objections over email is really hard. So the first thing you'd normally want to do is if you get an objection over email is you want to call them, right? But let's assume that that wasn't an option. What would I do over email? I would say, well, hey, I appreciate you responding. And my guess is you're not going to buy anything for the next 6 months. There are a couple things you might consider when working with ABC competitor. I put those into a 30-second video here. I promise this is the last time that I'll send you a note back, right? Are any of those things that you might be interested in unpacking, or are any of those things even moderately relevant? Or should we part ways here, right? So what I'm doing is I'm in the email. The only thing they're going to read is they're going to see that first sentence and it's going to be like, hey, I understand you, right? I am agreeing with your objection and you're probably not going to buy. I'm going to remove that pressure of the sale. But the way that I get them to listen a little bit more is by poking and saying there are a couple things you might consider with the current solution that you're on. And that's going to get me to get you to listen for 30 more seconds. And maybe that's the way I can convert my objection into a meeting. Can't do it all over email.
No. I love that first tip. Get an objection over email. Get any reply over email, actually. In fact, I often think pick up the phone is one of the best things you can do. Failing that, I like the fact that you recommended video instead of just trying to answer it via email because a lot of the communication gets lost in there. Love a video over here at Lavender, ex-Vidyardi myself. That's everything for today because we are at time, like you pointed out. Is there anything you'd like to plug or leave us with before we say farewell here?
Well, I think you should go check out Will Allred's episode on the 30 Minutes to President's Club podcast. And if you like what you saw here, if you're a 30 MPC fan, go connect with all of our favorite Wills over at Lavender. Lavender is an awesome sponsor for 30 MPC. And every time I jump on one of your webinars, one of these live chats or anything like that, I genuinely just enjoy working with y'all. So the love goes right back to y'all. All right.
Aww. My little purple heart. Thanks, Armand. I really appreciate it. And as I said, folks, if you're planning on sequences, cold outbound, just launched a new YouTube video. Head on over to our YouTube channel. You can rewatch the replay of this there. Saw a couple of people asking in the chat. But there's also a new video there of me making loads of potatoes. So go see what that's about. Thanks so much, Armand. Have a fab day and the rest of your week.